Conan the Hyborian Age is a tabletop RPG by Monolith Board Games. This is not a board game, although Monolith did in fact make a Conan board game that raised $3.3 million on Kickstarter in 2015, as well as at least one expansion that I could find that raised another $1 million this year. This RPG is crowdfunding on Kickstarter at the time of this recording. That campaign ends November 5th with a late pledge period that will follow. Monolith was kind enough to send me basically a completed finished copy of the core rulebook in PDF format, and I'll just cut to the chase here. I thought it was the most well-produced and refreshingly designed Conan RPG I have yet to come across. But I don't know, I'll let you be the judge. Now, Monolith is doing a clever thing where they're incorporating maps and miniatures from their original board game into this RPG, as well as producing some, from what I can tell, high quality peripherals like these specialty dice, two-sided character sheet pads, 11 double-sided maps, and just a straight up dedicated box of 221 miniatures for use with this RPG. I will not be able to show you any of that stuff in this video because it hasn't been produced yet and they weren't able to send it to me before recording this. So this video is just going to address the merits of the core rulebook, and I'll briefly cover the 2 adventure modules that you can get with the core book as well. And at the end, I'll give you my honest thoughts about the game. I know it sounds a little superficial to say this, but the artwork licensed for this particular Conan RPG is really the most remarkable and evocative I've ever seen for a Conan game. Now, artwork does not make an RPG playing experience better, but when you're able to throw in works by Brahm and other legends from over the years, you really class up the whole reading experience. And it sort of makes you subconsciously elevate the rest of the content in the book. Anyway, there's this great primer on what Conan is in pop culture. If you're not familiar, he's a character from the author Robert E. Howard's stories. Howard was a pulp fiction writer from the early 20th century who sort of pioneered the genre of sword and sorcery, although that term didn't come about until Fritz Leiber coined it later on. Howard wrote 17 stories featuring Conan, including a full-length novel, and those stories ranged from desert adventures to weird horror, exploration of forgotten worlds, piracy, frontier tales, and ghost stories. It was pulp fiction after all, and variety was the key. But despite all the variety, there was one character who emerged throughout all of these stories, Conan. He is a, quote, uncultured barbarian who nonetheless uses his sharp intellect, superhuman strength, and prowess, and keen instincts to master every situation. And probably a lot more importantly, in the context of a role-playing game, since you're not likely to play as Conan, is the setting that Howard established through his stories. That's really the main attraction here. The overall concept is that this is Earth, but it's so far in the distant past that countless global cataclysms have erased any traces of these kingdoms and cultures that once thrived. And when you zero in on the time of Conan, that time is called the Hyborian Age, where the use of magic is rare and dangerous, and there are deadly creatures. Oh, and since Robert E. Howard was good pen pals with Howard Philip Lovecraft, all of Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos, at least the prehistorical stuff, is also officially applicable to this world. As far as where Conan has appeared in pop culture, it has been almost 100 years of comics, films, animated and live-action TV shows, video games, and obviously board games, miniatures games, and more than a few RPGs, not to mention books. The licenses for Conan have shifted over the decades, and there are dozens, hundreds of stories that claim to take place in Howard's Conan setting, but what this game's creators try to do is rein it all back in and focus almost entirely on what Robert E. Howard himself wrote about the setting. Which is to say, one of the major value propositions of this game is that they stay focused on the source material. Creating a character is pretty straightforward. I think the most interesting and important choice that you make here is your origin. This is like your class or archetype. There are 10 origins offered in this core rulebook, and the first is From the Hills. This is a warrior born on or beyond the frontiers of civilization. This is essentially what Conan is. Mechanically, the most important information is here. A From the Hills guy or girl gets a bonus to one chosen stat, a good amount of starting health, but no ability to use magic. From the Streets is a rogue or thief archetype. This one starts with a bonus to what are essentially dexterity checks, as well as to attacks, and a couple of thief-related skills. Again, no sorcery. From the Steppes is one who excels in ranged damage both on foot and on a mount such as a horse. No sorcery for this one either. From the North is a berserker type character who gets a bonus to melee damage as well as a choice of either extra starting hit points called life points or the ability to push and get more attacks. They also start with a lot of life. No sorcery. From the Wilds is a hunter or tracker type. I guess if I had one complaint across all of these origins is that they do seem to sort of overlap, at least in theme. The mechanics vary a little bit, like this From the Wilds origin has a fairly aggressive life recovery ability. You trade stamina points for life points. I'll cover stamina in a minute, but it's basically your meta currency in the game. You spend it to alter reality here and there. But yeah, the thematic core of many of these origins do feel kind of samey. From a Civilized Land. This is essentially the game's wizard. You've got +2 to wits checks, which are used for sorcery checks, among other things. Uncanny Warding increases your sorcery defense score, which is this abstracted value that each character has for defending against magical attacks and effects. And you can use all sorcery skills from the alchemy discipline. Let's jump over to alchemy and check out what that entails. There are 5 sorcery disciplines in this game, and if your character knows at least one spell in a given discipline, they also get these inherent spells associated with that discipline. So if you're playing a From a Civilized Land character, you have these minor spells: create food, create light, basically, and one that allows you to divine the origin of an object, which is actually really overly powerful if you're in a mystery game. These inherent spells don't have any specific rules or costs, so I guess it's up to the GM to homebrew the missing details on these. For example, with this Artifact Spirit spell where you can determine the origin of any physical object you touch, that could short circuit a mystery story instantly. So I'd probably want to attach some kind of dire cost to using that spell. Anyway, with the alchemy discipline, there are 6 main spells, and each have a cost in XP to acquire in the first place, as well as a cost in stamina and or life points to cast. In the world of Conan, sorcery is both rare and dangerous. As you can see from the spell list, alchemy doesn't necessarily require components. There actually isn't any detail on how your character casts the spell, but narratively, I guess you'd have them have some potions or powders or something. Also, you can tell from the effects of these spells that your character is meant to do a lot of battle. The next available origin is From Parts Unknown. This is essentially a sorcerer, for lack of a better term. You have access to spells from any 2 of the 5 disciplines, and you can spend stamina to increase your sorcery defense. This is also a great example of really good artwork selling the given aspect of the game. The next origin is From the Blood of Jabal Sag, which is oddly specific all of a sudden. Jabal Sag is the name of a druidic god who once lived in an ancient forest. Your character here can recover 2 extra life points anytime they regain any life points, and they start with the healing skill, which is a spell under the white magic discipline. Let's take a look at white magic. This is druidic magic through and through. You can inherently understand animals, sense sorcery nearby, and sense life and health in a creature. And as far as your major spells, you can heal, call upon different animals. Notice how giant serpents are just around, and they aren't even the most dangerous creatures. You can also buff other characters with extra actions, stamina points, and just all checks generally. From the Blood of Acheron is another sorcerer, basically, but with a cultist flavor to it. Acheron is the name of an ancient fallen society ruled by sorcerers who sacrificed each other for power. They were defeated by barbarians, but a vestige of their dark order remains, and you can play as one of them. You can cast spells at reduced life cost, and access any spell from any discipline. I think it should be noted that the origin description describes Acheron and its adherents as relatively power-hungry and evil, but it also suggests that your character could be an outlier or rebel, someone who wants to do good, or maybe someone who struggles with what is right and wrong. The last origin is From the Blood of a Demon. It's kind of hard to skirt around the morality on this one. You get a +1 to sorcery attacks and +2 to all sorcery damage that you deal, and most importantly, you have access to black magic and demon magic. Black magic is definitely the stuff you see the most of in the original Conan stories. You can inherently eavesdrop, manipulate shadows, and see in the dark, and your main spells include the ability to make a snake arrow, Thulsa Doom anyone, project yourself for a few seconds to leave a voice message or scare people, magically ward off attacks, turn into a beast, but only for one round, or make a couple of different magical attacks. Demonic magic is a little darker. Inherently, you can track people down after smelling their blood, sense demons nearby, and have fairly strong protection from demons. Your main spells include sharp magical talons, extension of your attacks, you can summon fiends, and their more powerful counterparts called horrors. As far as stats go, this game takes an interesting approach of having both step dice and regular modifiers. So you have 4 core stats: might, edge, grit, and wits. These range from 1 to 8 points. Each of these stats is also rated as a D6, D8, or D10, and the number is the modifier. So if you're making a test of might and you have a 6 in might as well as a D8 rating, you would roll the D8 and add 6. Just like with most RPGs, you would then add or subtract a modifier to this roll based on gear, spells, applicable skills, and the environmental circumstances, up to +3 or -3 on any given roll. The goal with your roll is to meet or exceed a difficulty number, and here are the ranges that give you an idea of what you're trying to beat. There's one other interesting novelty with the dice mechanics, and that is the flex die. Anytime you're rolling the dice for a test, you will also include a D10, a D8, or a D6. And if the highest value on that die is rolled, then something awesome happens, like you immediately gain a stamina point, or automatically succeed the test, or regain all spent life or stamina points on a spell cast. Or if it's a damage roll, then you can greatly increase damage. I'd have to play this game extensively to know just how much impact this would have on gameplay, but just from reading this mechanic and extrapolating the possibilities, the flex die really makes this game seem very oriented towards heroic moments that just favor the player, which itself isn't good or bad. It's just an intentional bent towards more exaggerated character moments like those found in the original Conan stories. As far as combat, you get 2 actions per turn by default, although there are spells and skills that might grant you more. Here's a list of things you might spend your actions on in any given turn. As you can see, the game has a very straightforward turn economy. Incoming damage can be reduced by your armor rating. Couple of things to note here. One is that you're discouraged from using or encountering heavy armor in this setting if you're trying to stay faithful to the source material. Most denizens of the Hyborian Age did not wear heavy armor. And also, again, just look at this art. I wish I could tell you who specifically did these illustrations. I'm just loving it. As far as damage and death, your hit points or life points are the only thing you track for health. When that number reaches 0, then you have to make a grit check with a difficulty of 8. So you'd take whichever die rating you have for grit, roll that, and add your grit number rating, with the hope of meeting or exceeding 8. You'd also be rolling your flex die here, and if that resulted in its max value, then that would also count as a success. If you fail this grit check though, then your character is dead. The GM is given discretion though to sort of save you from death if it's better for the story. This notion is actually surprisingly controversial with people. There are some who feel that death should be absolute in RPGs because otherwise the stakes are meaningless and there's no way to trigger any sort of adrenal response when in combat. I like the notion of a middle ground here, where a PC might recover from certain death, but they'd have to carry a terrible penalty, burden, disability, or scar as a result. I don't think death should always mean death in every single circumstance, but no one should be given a free ride. Okay, so stamina points. Here's how they work. Each character has a set number of stamina points at the beginning of each session. They can spend those points on each of these things, mainly boosting a roll on a check or attack, increasing damage, or increasing range of a thrown weapon. They can gain stamina points during a session beyond their starting number, but it will reset to their starting number of points at the beginning of next session. At the end of every game session, all PCs will enter a respite period where they receive 1 to 3 XP that they can spend on a new skill, and those include spells, by the way. They get all their life and stamina points back and remove all conditions. It's pretty generous, right? It's almost like an old video game where your character is just sort of magically restored at the start of the next level. The idea is that the designers don't want PCs in a death spiral where they just get whittled down to an inevitable death. It's about recreating heroic moments, as amply depicted in the original stories. And by the way, aside from the starting skills that you can choose from in this game, there are also these 44 legendary skills to buy with hard-earned XP. And this is where you'll see virtually all your PC improvements. They sort of simplified things by just calling all of these level ups skills, even though things like increasing a stat or a stat die is not traditionally referred to as a skill. I don't mind it though. This makes it easier for players when choosing how to improve their character. One thing that might have been nice is to have the basic skills listed near the legendary skills. They're about 50 pages apart in the book. As far as who your PCs will be fighting, the rulebook stats out a bunch of possibilities. There are several classes of enemies generally. These so-called minions don't have a pool of life points that you whittle down. Instead, they have thresholds. You have to land an attack that delivers damage equal to or higher than the threshold in order to take down a minion. The next level up are antagonists, and they do have a life point pool that you whittle down. There are 8 different human enemy archetypes listed, with 3 variations each. And then you start moving into magical enemies like living statues, undead, whose most notable feature is that they take half damage from arrows. Mummies come with magical attacks. Ghosts are immune from physical attacks. Vampires can somewhat easily turn your PC into a thrall, unless the GM bends the rules a little bit to allow for some kind of heroic rescue. Then there are 6 monstrosity type enemies. Demons can pose an interesting tactical threat, especially the winged one. And of course you have giant animals like a jumbo scorpion in 3 different levels of difficulty, and giant serpents, of course. One of the most rewarding aspects of this rulebook is the care and attention put into the setting history. And as I may have mentioned before, the authors acknowledge drawing upon Lovecraft's work as well as Robert E. Howard's original writing when compiling this comprehensive prehistory of the world. Long story short, you just have a world that is composed of layer after layer of civilization, each one lost to a global cataclysm that erased its population, such that by the time you get to Conan's era, the Hyborian Age, the continent in question is a dangerous, unknowable land full of weird and wild secrets. I appreciate how the authors really tried to limit their source material, so when I read through it, I felt like I was getting the most authentic treatment of the Conan universe. The history treatment sort of wraps up at the time that Conan himself has taken the throne of Aquilonia, and eventually that kingdom, like all the others before it and around it, eventually fall to an ice age. There's actually a whole other chapter that describes each of the realms of the setting, and there are a lot of realms. It's highly implausible if you think about it, but each region of this continent has a unique culture and character to it. With all of these territories being contiguous, this would be highly unlikely, but this is the sort of thing you see in fantasy worlds all the time. The authors did something interesting here and traced Howard's original inspirations for each of these nations and cultures to their real-world culture. Here's a breakdown of that. They note that Howard always erred on the side of creative license and entertainment rather than historical accuracy. He was a pulp fiction writer after all. I think my chief complaint of this chapter is that as a reader and a Conan fan, it's a great walkthrough of all the different lands referred to in the stories, but as a game master who might want to set a session or campaign in one of these lands, most of the realms are described a bit sparsely. But to be fair, in order to give each of these realms a fair treatment, the authors would have had to take a lot of artistic license in creating new details not found in the original stories. And then they would be guilty of the one thing that they were trying to avoid, which is venturing outside of the very carefully curated source material. In the end, they tell you that just like the way Howard picked and chose details and elements that he needed to tell a fun story, you as the GM should probably be doing the same when running this game. Just relax on the adherence to canon and allow yourself to be inspired and creative with the setting. The final section of the core rulebook provides 3 adventures, and I'm not going to cover them here, but I do want to make note of a couple of things. The first is that each of these 3 tales, as they're called, run about 6 to 8 pages each, so they're very easy to digest and to prep for. And the second thing is that this format of brief combat encounter-oriented adventure is repeated across not 1, but 2 separate adventure books. Tales of the Hyborian Age Volume 1 runs 134 pages and contains 7 adventures, one of which is a more involved story that is meant to be run over about 5 sessions. I don't want to spoil too much about any of these, but the encounter maps are great and they're chock full of unique enemy stat blocks. And then you have Tales of the Hyborian Age Volume 2, which runs 130 pages and contains 11 adventures, each running about 10 pages. So between the core book and the 2 adventure volumes, there are 20 adventures to get you started. I think if you were to actually run all 20 of these adventures, you'd have a firm enough grasp on the setting and the intended feel of the game to be able to make your own adventures moving forward. But it wouldn't surprise me if Monolith continued publishing adventure books as well. Alright, so here are my thoughts on Conan the Hyborian Age. Cons. Origins themes have overlap. The difference between some of the origins felt a bit precariously thin. I think as a solution, they could have each used some more suggestions for cultural or kingdom origins. Inherent spells feel incomplete. The 3 inherent spells that come with each magic discipline are occasionally very powerful, but none of them come with any mechanics or costs or rules, so it's up to the GM to homebrew that stuff. That's actually not a big deal for an experienced GM, but it could be confounding for newer folks. Description of nations could use some elaboration. Like I said, the authors chose not to invent a bunch of details for each realm or territory, but as a GM reading this stuff, I can see a region description as being a bit lacking in terms of the detail required to flesh out a location. Pros. Flex die, stamina points, and respite creates pulpy action. The flex die is constantly giving you a chance for some crazy power up on your dice roll with absolutely no cost or downside. The stamina points are very potent meta currency that you're constantly using to bolster rolls or damage or what have you, and is really just limited by how generous the GM wants to be in replenishing them during a session. And then you have the respite rule, which basically restores your PC to full freshness at the beginning of every session or so. This all culminates in a very high-powered, pulpy adventure experience where characters are just kicking in doors and beheading giant snakes left and right. And if you as a player can make a good case for not dying, then the GM can waive the death rule for you as well. Step dice plus stat rating hybrid is interesting. I've only ever seen a game use points for stats or step dice, but not both. If you've watched my channel for any notable period of time, then you know I love novel game design, and this stat approach is definitely new to me. I think from a player perspective, it would at least make dice rolling less redundant. You get to constantly roll different dice instead of just a d20 or a handful of d6s like with most games. Magic is costly and rare. I'm a fan of grittier fantasy settings, even though this game might not have gritty mechanics to match. The fact that you can't spam fireballs or cast your way out of every problem is really where I want to be in terms of magic. Setting history is rich and researched. I've mentioned it a couple times already. I really like the approach that the authors took in terms of limiting their source material and creating what I think ultimately is a beautiful new source book for Conan, one that's faithful to Howard's original works above all else. Artwork and layout. Monolith has a distinct advantage here in being able to tap their licenses for artwork used in their immensely successful Conan board game and board game expansions, so you end up with a ton of jaw-dropping illustrations and way above average battle maps, and the layouts of the text and text boxes is very pleasant to read. It's just an all-around grade A visual experience. Probably good. Maps and minis. Okay, so at the time of recording, I can't say for sure if the 11 double-sided maps or the big box of 220 miniatures is good, but it's a fairly strong value proposition to say, here's an RPG, and here are about a dozen maps, and all the minis you would need to run this RPG for a good while. Maybe you would exhaust the maps somewhat quickly, but 221 miniatures is pretty much a full-blown collection. I'd love to get my hands on all the physical stuff and do a follow-up review of this game. Let me know if you're backing this one and if you'd like to see more coverage of this game sometime down the line. I've left links for everything below. Thanks as always for watching. See ya!